Hey, Danny, do you want to raise?
Absolutely.
Let's talk about the Celtics. Welcome to Dethroning the Warriors, a multi-part series where we talk about the big story looming over this year's NBA playoffs, who can take down the Golden State Warriors. That's Danny Chau.
That is Justin Verrier.
Today we're going to talk about the Boston Celtics, the Ringer's own, even though we have way more Philadelphia 76ers fans, probably only like 2 Boston fans, but they are pretty prominent, so we'll go with it. We're going to start with how this team was built. I think this one's interesting because Danny Ainge has this reputation of being Trader Danny. And people think that like he's just this big cold-blooded assassin. Like he'll sell your kids for the right draft pick. But I think it's really interesting if you look over how this team was put together. It's really just like a meticulous plan that came together over 6 years. Mm-hmm. That's when the Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce trade happened. Got all those picks in there, and from there they really just kind of stacked good draft picks. Yep. If you look at all the ones from the past couple of years, Jason Tatum obviously over Markelle Fultz, trading back and getting the guy they want. Marcus Smart over Julius Randle.
Marcus Smart!
Jaylen Brown at 3, which at the time was pretty big. I think a lot of people expected him to be more like 6'7" range.
Felt like a reach, but you look at his raw skills coming out of high school, coming out of college at Cal. Big, long athlete, wasn't really a shooter per se, but has really kind of developed into one.
Yep.
Over the past couple years?
Yeah, Terry Rozier, another guy. There have been some misses, guys that didn't really pop, but like you're looking in the teens range.
Like James Young?
And James Young was not good, unfortunately.
Bill Simmons.
And that's the one everyone will remember, especially here at the Ringer. And then on top of that, they kind of just signed the right guys for what they want to do.
Absolutely.
Horford, Gordon Hayward, not the sexiest stars you can sign in free agency, but 2 super versatile guys, probably 2 of the more versatile guys out there, and it really fits the Brad Stevens system. And then they turn some of those assets into Kyrie Irving. But still, I think this team still revolves around what HORFORD is able to do, just like they were last year. Danny, take us through basically how he affects the team and Kyrie specifically.
Yeah, I feel like when we talk about the Celtics, especially this year, we're often talking about, what's the last thing that Kyrie said to ruin team chemistry?
Right.
Or, it's rarely kind of been on the court. But when you look at this team and what they've been able to do this season, they really can't do any of it without Al Horford. He hasn't quite looked like himself in the first half of the season. He was dealing with some injuries and it just wasn't really in the groove for the most part. But in the second half, he's really turned it on and the numbers really bear it out. So after the All-Star break, we're looking at, with Al Horford on the court, the Celtics are outscoring opponents by 7.5 points per 100 possessions, and they're getting outscored by 9.8 points per 100 when he's off the court.
Pretty good.
That's a 17-point swing.
That's a lot of points.
It's a lot of points. So he's really the only player holding this team together.
Which makes sense because if you look at all the guys that they have, they do certain things well. Jaylen Brown on defense, Jason Tatum still a good offensive player when he doesn't settle for jump shots. Kyrie Irving, not a two-way player. Al is the guy who can make a huge difference on both ends of the court. You don't see that on a lot of teams, let alone the Celtics.
Right, and when you're looking at a championship contender, one of the main assets that you need on a championship team like that is a guy in the front court who can provide all the versatility that you need.
Yeah.
So if you're looking back over the past 4 championship runs, we're looking at Draymond, we're looking at LeBron James, we're looking at Kevin Durant. 3 guys who can, facilitate, shoot threes, make plays, play defense, both ends of the floor type of guys at, the 4 and 5 position. And that's exactly what Al Horford gives them. He's one of the best defenders in the league, stonewalls guys in the post, but can also defend in space. He's a reliable 3-point shooter, and he's probably their best passer.
Yeah.
And so when you have that kind of foundation, that's what allows a lot of these 3-and-D guys, the Jaylen Browns, the Jason Tatums, the Marcus Smarts, the freedom to kind of just play their role and stick to their role. And it also allows Kyrie to be who he's always been. Kyrie has kind of always been insulated when playing with LeBron, in that LeBron kind of handled most of the playmaking duties, most of the defensive duties. Kyrie just had to go out and score. When he was on the Cavs, that meant a lot of pick and rolls, that meant a lot of ISO ball. What it means with the Celtics, and specifically Brad Stevens, is shot diversities, mind-boggling compared to what it used to be.
Yeah, the catch and shoot numbers for Kyrie, the frequency with which he's doing that is off the charts now. Before, probably more of a pull-up guy, a guy who's going to operate in the pick and roll, but you see the ball moving around. And even though Hayward hasn't played as well, even though Tatum hasn't played as well as scorers, you could see the ball still pinging around. Right. And if you have any hope for the Celtics kind of tapping into that team from last year, I think that's a big part of it. But we've seen flashes of that team come about, one of which was against the Warriors in the most recent game that they played. Danny, take us through their 2 games that they played against Golden State this season.
Yeah, so the first game they played was in January 26th. It was a real rowdy kind of playoff finals type atmosphere in Boston. The Warriors won 115-111, so it was a really close game. And it really felt like the finals because Kevin Durant was the most impactful player, which is kind of what happens during the finals when everything kind of slows down and condenses, and you need a guy to just take over matchups wherever they are on the court.
Yeah, and there's a lot going into these matchups outside of the actual gameplay. You have the Kevin Durant and Kyrie factor. You have the factor that everyone expected the Celtics to be the main competition for the Warriors going into this season. Right. That's still there when they play against each other. 2 really big crowds. I don't know, there's just East Coast, West Coast thing. There's just a lot that goes into these games. I think that one, I don't know how much we can take from the results because it was in January, but at the same time, you could see like all the different chemical reactions that come as a result of these matchups.
Yeah, and March 5th, the second matchup, not quite so good. No. So it was a 128-95 Celtics blowout. I mean, the Celtics were up at one point by 35 points. Like the Warriors were just sleepwalking through the game. This was the infamous game in which Steve Kerr basically called out the Warriors and was like, we need to play with more anger. And KD's just like trolling Kerr and was just like, oh, I thought we played with joy.
And the media as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think he's quite fond of them either.
So yeah, like I agree with everything you said. This would be the most dramatic finals possible, given all of the free agent storylines, given Kyrie and KD's affinity for one another, and the likelihood of them potentially partnering up in another city. I mean, there's a lot that could change with this one series in terms of just NBA history going forward.
Yeah, and another big thing from that last matchup, Gordon Hayward goes off for 30. You don't see that often from Hayward these days. I think 35 and 30 he had against the Wolves, but other than that, he hasn't passed 30 this season as a scorer. And that's bringing us to our Achilles heel, which is where is the second star going to come from? I think, Dan, you made a good point that this team, over the past couple weeks of the season, they leaned into this hierarchy that I think they established going into the season, which was Kyrie and Horford are your guys. Kyrie's the scorer. Horford's going to unlock a lot of everything else is going to happen. And then the wings are going to kind of fill in from there. But we haven't really seen those guys play into those roles.
Right, there was kind of like this expectation of exponential growth. Like Jason Tatum had such a phenomenal rookie season in which he, one, stepped up for an injured Gordon Hayward and became like that kind of tertiary scorer who was very good at threes. And then all of a sudden he comes in the season, he's like, all I want to do is shoot mid-range jump shots.
Yeah, it's really disappointing to watch.
Like Jaylen Brown was just miserable for the first 2 months of the season and has dealt with injuries and stuff like that.
I think part of it also is just the roles that they're playing. Last year they excelled in the playoffs as a collective. Right. Now they're very much a Kyrie team. There's that Dean Oliver stat where the Celtics, when Kyrie plays and he goes to the bench, they kind of crater. Yeah. But when he doesn't play at all, they're actually kind of fine. And it makes sense just because I think these guys are cast into roles that might not necessarily like be their strong suits. For instance, Gordon Hayward's a fine shooter, but he's not in a plus shooter. He shot 40% from 3 in his last season with the Jazz, but I think he's more of like a 30% shooter, 36% shooter.
And he's also a guy who you want to get in rhythm. And on the Jazz, he got so many reps. He was the primary playmaker for his final 3 years on the Jazz. And so he had the kind of ability to work within the flow of the offense and kind of just get himself into that comfort zone. Whereas here it's like, well, he has to share the ball with like 4 other people who are equally deserving.
Yeah, and you can still see his high IQ on the court against the Pacers, for instance. He was moving the ball. I think he makes a lot of the right plays. But you could definitely see that maybe he's like too hesitant. And also just like the shots that look good coming out of his hands just aren't falling. And it's surprising because there isn't anything wrong with it. It does seem like he is still shying away from contact. He's like kind of driving into the lane and then just pulling up rather than trying to go at the rim or try to draw fouls. Jason Tatum, same thing, but his is even more perplexing because he doesn't have an injury to rely on. It just seems like he shies away from it. And so you have a lot of guys.
A lot of side steps.
Yeah, a lot of side steps, a lot of just floating. He's just very passive, and it's really frustrating because you watch him and he's just so technically proficient. Kyrie has this like way of like, he's just like, he obviously leans into this, him and Harden, this artistry that he can just like kind of do wherever the ball like takes him. Tatum plays almost like a guy who's been playing, like someone who's been playing the piano his entire life.
Yeah.
Like it's just drilled into him that this is how he does this and this, but it all works and he gets open shots, but it's just, he settles for bad shots way too often and he gets kind of tunnel vision. It's really frustrating. Jaylen Brown, more of like an effort guy. He's going to get everything off of activity, not a good shooter, even though he shot really well last year.
He's probably one guy, he's probably the biggest victim of them having another mouth to feed in Gordon Hayward. Last year, he really stepped up as the prototypical 3-and-D wing for them. This year, he hasn't been able to get into a groove. He's had to deal with a couple injuries, but he is a guy in the playoffs that I feel would do better in the playoffs than he would in the regular season, just because when you're looking at matchups, the guy is really strong, really athletic, really long, can play 3 or 4 positions. I mean,
and without Marcus Smart there is an opening to be that guy.
Absolutely.
And I wonder if it's kind of addition by subtraction. Even though Smart has been really good for this team, I do wonder if like Jaylen Brown steps into that role. Now he has a clear role that he can play. Terry Rozier, who knows? He's found money, basically. I don't think you need him as often if you have Kyrie, who's like Terry plus.
I would argue he has not found money because he has lost a lot of money playing the way he has this season. It's been a rough look for him. He bet on himself. It kind of backfired. But there's a lot of talent there. There's a tenacious defender. There's a plus athlete, a really strong shooter. The pieces are there. It's just, man, there are so many mouths to feed on this team. He's going to need to find a team for his own.
Yeah, and I think you definitely saw it in that game 1 against the Pacers. Kyrie kind of wasn't up to like his usual self in that first half. Came on late, but there was nobody filling that void in between. And so it's great to be a Kyrie team, you need these other guys, especially against a team like the Warriors, who are going to beat you in so many different ways. And they're like, unless you're playing the Clippers, there are going to be these lulls where they're not going to have like 2 Hall of Famers on the court. I think Hayward is a big one in this kind of series. He's kind of their inflection point. Take us through kind of maybe some of the plays that they can maybe get him back to being himself.
Yeah, I think we were listing just all of these players that would love to get more touches and we would love to see be a little bit more involved. And I think it has to start in terms of, who's going to be the next guy up after Horford and Kyrie. It has to be the guy who gets paid the most on the team, right?
Sure.
Like Gordon Hayward is getting paid $32 million per year until 2021, probably because he's definitely not opting out of his contract. He has the size, the playmaking, the facilitation ability to be a very, very good player at the 4 position, especially when they downsize and when you're going against these lineups of death that the Warriors are capable of doing. And really, the best way to get him involved is by getting him wide open shots. Basically what we're looking at here is Gordon Hayward stepping in, trying to screen for Kyrie Irving, immediately going over to the wing.
It's a wide open shot.
Yeah, and Aaron Baines sets the screen.
I mean, I think it's going to be there for him, especially now, because if he's not hitting it, they're just going to let him have it.
Right.
Because most of the time, they're putting a lot of credible 3-point shooters on. Baines is on the floor right now, but that's probably going to be Horford. You're going to see probably a lot of Horford-Hayward front courts, especially against the Warriors. Brown is someone you have to keep in mind. I think they might sag off him a little bit, but Tatum is still a devastating 3-point shooter. I would like to see him shoot more from volume. But, you have to watch out for these guys, and obviously Kyrie. So it's like Hayward's going to have the shots, and it's really going to come down to him making. It's as simple as that. All right, let's finish here with our Warriors scale. This is where we talk about how worried the Warriors should be about the opponent we're discussing. From a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the most worried, 1 being the least worried. I guess the Hawks maybe would be a 1. Danny, how worried are you? Or how worried should the Warriors be?
Let's give it a 6.
That's high.
Yeah.
That's really bold.
Yeah, I feel like, one, you have a guy who's done it before. in Kyrie. You have a guy who is one of the elite shot creators and shot makers in the league. You have Horford, who, look, for as unexciting as he is exactly the type of player you need to match up with the Warriors. And they just have an entire expansive list of 3-and-D wings to surround them with. So I think they are built in a way that they can stand up to the Warriors as long as they get offensive contributions from a third or fourth guy.
All right, I'm not gonna go as high. I'm gonna go with a 3. And partly that's because I put the Bucks at, I think, a 4.5, so I have to recalibrate my system here. I think if I could count on Hayward, if I can count on Tatum being there, if I can count on Brown, if I can count on Smart being healthy again, I would be all in on this team. On paper, they're just incredible. I think it's just probably the best collection of talent, individual talents, outside of the Warriors still, which is crazy to say considering what the Raptors have done, what the Bucks have done. I just can't count on any of it. Like, how do we know that Hayward's ever going to be this player that he was like 2 years ago, let alone in this series? I think he needs more, like a few more months, another offseason to kind of get back into the flow of things. The Warriors are just like, they can find, if you have a weakness, the Warriors are going to find it and expose it. I think that's him. I'm
starting to think that my high grades are because I'm just like a really big worrywart, like in general. And I'm just like, I'm projecting my worry onto the Warriors.
Even though you are #1 Warriors fan today with that hat.
Oh yeah.
All right, that's it for us. Tell us who you want us to talk about next, because all the other teams in the NBA don't seem to be as elite as we thought they would be. Write in the comments who you think we should talk about. Go on the Twitters, on the social media, and we will see you next time.